Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Guess what? I've had my wheelchair for a year and a half. If you remember this video and all the videos I've made about wheelchairs, you know that when I bought it, it was a really big deal. I really struggled using wheelchairs in the past. I found them very anxiety inducing. I felt like everyone was looking at me. It was really unpleasant, but I really knew that I needed more help getting around and being able to go out for longer. So I really started looking into wheelchairs. I rented one for a day, I rented one for a week. I tried to get over my fear of it. And then I bought my wheelchair.
I just bought a wheelchair. I feel a little bit shocked.
And it was terrifying, but oh my God, it was such a good decision. Like, I don't know why, I do know why I didn't do it sooner. It's because I was too scared.
One of the big things that I'm struggling to get past in the wheelchair buying process is when I buy a wheelchair, that's fully admitting to myself that this is my life. I don't have the right words to explain what the fear is because this doesn't change anything.
But if I could go back, I would get it sooner because it just makes my life so much easier. Quite often in the past, a friend would say, oh, do you want to go here? And I'd say, I can't walk that far. Whereas now I say, oh, would you be happy to push me? And they say yes. And then I go, you know, it brings me a lot of freedom to hang out with my friends when I couldn't before. Because it's manual and I don't have a lot of strength, it doesn't really open up the world when I'm going places alone. But to be honest, it's not the main reason I wanted it. The main reason I wanted it was so I could spend more time with my friends and not have to say no to things that were really fun. And it works for that. However many months later, I decorated it and it feels like it's more me. It feels like it's definitely mine, and I get a lot of compliments on it. Quite honestly, a lot of people tell me they really like the knitted pink and the butterflies. I get a lot of comments saying that they think it's really cool, and I think it's really cool as well. If you have a wheelchair, I would definitely recommend adding something personal to it. I think it made me feel a lot more confident. I didn't think that anyone would think, I don't know, there was always this fear that people would be like, oh, why is she using a wheelchair? Is it even her wheelchair? You know, those kind of thoughts. And after I decorated it, something about it was so obviously mine. I wear a lot of pink, I'm very feminine in my presentation, and so is the wheelchair now. And I really like that they match more than they did before, and it gave me a lot of confidence because nobody's gonna just think I'm just borrowing the wheelchair or I've stolen it from my nan or anything like that, because it's so obviously my wheelchair, and that just gives me like a lot of confidence. I do get chatted to more than I did before, and that like is like a valid fear. I'm not the best at socializing. I have a lot of anxiety, and people do chat to me. They do, you know, strike up conversations either about the decoration or about the wheelchair itself. Sometimes people ask, let's say, impertinent questions about why I'm in a wheelchair and what's wrong with me, things like that. What's happened is a common one, but they're never intending to be mean. I either get compliments, I get people telling me that their second cousin's brother's aunt is disabled, which is a bit weird, but it's, you know, not a problem. And I also get people who ask kind of a bit personal questions, which isn't ideal, and you know, we should be like not doing that. You know, someone's medical issues or history is not your business unless they feel they'd like to share it. So far in my experience, no one's been mean or aggressive or anything like that. And I think there's a lot of stories out there of people, you know, confronting disabled people and saying they're not really disabled and they're liars and all that kind of stuff. And obviously I'm sure it happens, but it hasn't happened to me. And I'd like to reassure you that most people are kind, and even the people that are impertinent and a bit rude aren't usually trying to be. They just haven't really thought it through. And I think that that's like an important distinction. I think that that is something that I feel like gives me a lot of confidence using my wheelchair. People, on average, people are really lovely. And sometimes they, you know, do things, you know, say things or ask questions that you wish they wouldn't, but you can tell the difference between someone who is overly curious in a way that's not appropriate, and someone who's actively, you know, just being horrible. I think there is a distinction, and I think it is interesting when people ask me what's wrong, what's happened. I just say, you know, I have a chronic illness. Kids ask me questions and I don't mind that at all. Quite happy to answer a child's question, because, you know, being a child is, you have to learn everything about the world. And you do that by asking questions and having adults explain things to you. Sometimes they've not seen a wheelchair before. Sometimes they want to know if I can walk. I tell them that walking hurts me, so I use the wheelchair to help. And they, you know, understand that quite easily. And they're very sweet, and I quite enjoy it, to be honest, when children ask me questions. I find it a little bit less enjoyable when adults ask me questions, because they're more usually of a medical nature. You know, what's wrong with you? And I, you know, just have a chronic illness, and I leave it at that. I don't go into any details. I think that's like enough information, and it's more than enough, to be fair. I don't need to tell them anything, but I just find it easier just to say a quick statement and be done with it. That's just how I personally deal with it. But it doesn't happen as much as you'd think. When I first started, I was terrified, and anytime anyone looked at me, I was like, oh God, you know, I'm just drawing so much unnecessary attention, and I feel so obvious, exposed, and just, ooh, it was horrible. But actually, people look at people, and, you know, sometimes you just feel a little bit sensitive to it. You know, people look to see where you are so they can get out of your way. You know, people look at each other, it's necessary. And I think sometimes when you feel really anxious, anytime anyone glances at you, you're like, God, they're thinking horrible things, and usually they're not. Usually most people are nice. Obviously, it's more like children who stare. But again, I don't worry about that. I think that's quite cute, and I really love it when I like pass a child in a pushchair and we're like at the same height, and they're so surprised, you know, because they're usually used to the fact that only children are in a, you know, a wheeled pushchair type thing, and at their height, so they see an adult and they're surprised and they're interested, and I think it's very cute. But if I could give you one thing, it's not as scary as you think. It's really not. I mean, it will be at the beginning, and it was at the beginning, and at the beginning there were many panic attacks about it, but overall it's not as bad as you think, because most people are nice. And not to say that there aren't awful people, but usually they're on the internet and not in real life, because generally people in life, you know, keep their opinions to themselves. Whereas on the internet, you're much more likely to get the, you know, you're faking it, you don't need that, what a waste, blah, blah, blah. The, you know, unhelpful comments. But in real life, people are so polite and kind, and I wish I could really show you what it's like, but you can't experience it until you've experienced it. That people just kind of get on with their own stuff and don't really think too much about what you're doing, you know? When you see people with glasses on, you don't think about it for that long. You don't consider what's their prescription, and are they long-sighted or short-sighted? Do they have? You don't really delve into their, you know, like medical stuff in your head. You don't really think about it. You just think they have glasses, you know. And I think it's kind of the same thing. Most people take someone in a wheelchair at absolute face value, person using a wheelchair, and that's like the whole of the thought process around it. It's very, I think most people find it very not a big deal. And for those of us who are new to being wheelchair users, it's not like a casual thing. It's a very big deal. It's very scary. It's very difficult to wrap your head around. Coming to terms with it, it's hard. Especially because of all the discourse around beating disability and walking, even though a doctor said you would never walk, and triumphing over wheelchair use, and all of these like narratives that are position walking as better than a wheelchair, no matter how painful or slow or inefficient it is. And unfortunately those narratives are quite pervasive in our culture, but it's one of those things that we have to really work on to get out of our heads, because actually for me, walking and being in pain is not better than using the wheelchair and feeling good, even though it can sometimes feel like succeeding to walk, but the walking hurts. And why I feel the need to choose the painful option just because it's better is like a societal thing, and we all got that idea in our minds, which is hard to like get rid of, but it's I think it's definitely worth working on, and I'm still working on it. And though I feel comfortable in the wheelchair, sometimes I feel too reliant on it or whatever. And I think that's that voice in the back of my head who's still got all of those learned things of that disabled is bad, that, you know, we've all learned throughout our lives, and sometimes we just have to consciously tell ourselves that no, disabled isn't bad, using a mobility aid isn't bad, it's helpful, it makes my life easier, it makes my life less painful, like all of these are good things. And sometimes we just have to like fight back at that little voice, and it's not easy, but it's getting easier for me. Over time, I'm getting more used to it and getting better at it, and it's really good. So some things I've done in the wheelchair: I've been to museums, my foot's numb. So some things that I've done with my wheelchair that I wouldn't have been able to do before is trips to museums, and we went to see the Jane Austen Day Parade in Bath. We go and get bubble tea from town, and it's too far for me to walk, but I can be pushed there. And shopping and going to a pub and just not being hemmed into a very small area. I live in a small city and my friends can walk pretty much all over it. I can't. But with the wheelchair, it's their walking that matters, and they can walk anywhere, and therefore so can I. That freedom is so key. I think sometimes people who think that using wheelchairs or any mobility aid is somehow inferior don't understand the amount we are limited without the wheelchair. I can walk very limited distance, and when I do walk that distance, I need to come home and rest for the rest of the next 2-3 days. Walking really takes it out of me. It's too much. It's like if you had to do a, cross-country run, and no matter where you were going, and you were unable to build up fitness, so every time you did it was just as painful and difficult and slow as the last time. But it gives me freedom, and I know it's difficult to take that step if you're really thinking about it. Try renting them, you can try them out in shopping centres, things like that. They have them in airports, you can borrow them from various places, and you can rent them for a week or more. Just have a try. I know it's terrifying, but you can do it. And if you're really limited with the things you can do and you want to be less limited, you want more freedom, you want to be able to go out more, you want to be able to spend more time with friends and family, try it. I really, really think that they're so helpful for anyone who struggles with walking the amount that they need to. And I really think you can do it. It's scary, but you got this. If you want to see more videos, there's lots about wheelchairs and mobility aids, walking sticks. I've also got stuff generally about chronic illness. Lots of things to watch on my channel. And I'm now posting videos every other week on Fridays. So I hope you stick around and enjoy my content. Bye!